Welcome to the classic album, Deep Dive. On this episode, we're going to be diving deeply into the classic album that is Judas Priest's Screaming for Vengeance. Or as I like to call it, it's rather a long title, Screaming for Forgiveness, because our last record was pre-planned shite. Now I know there are some misguided souls who think point of entry, or as I like to call it, point of no return, was a half-decent affair. But they are wrong. And in this video, I will tell you why. Disclaimer, though I've researched this album and band intensively, there are certain comments that I will make that are my assumptions only based on the aforesaid research. Okay. Screaming for Vengeance was released in July 1982, hit 11 in UK, 17 on US Billboard, but spent over a year in the Billboard charts, eventually going double platinum. So what's obvious and has to be discussed is that this was our direct response and was totally born out of the causal clusterfuck fallout triggered by this. But what we don't know is why. Why did Judas Priest write an album as bad as this? Especially after the superb British Still, which had nearly cracked top 30 on Billboard. It doesn't make sense, does it? Because something major went down that no one is talking about. But if you research intently, if you sift through what certain band members relate about that period in retrospect, and if you examine a certain colossally important action that the band decided upon just before writing Point of Entry, there could be a reason. And I'm going to give you my take on it. Because without this, there would never have been that. In late 1980, I believe there was an all-important emergency boardroom meeting between the band, Tom Allen, and Columbia Records. And I believe I know exactly why this meeting was called. And I can categorically state that what I'm about to say has never been heard before. So strap in, or strap on. Picture the scene. Not with the strap on. Okay. Sometime late 1980, it might even have been around Christmas. Judas Priest are gathered in an anonymous office for an impromptu emergency meeting with the American arm of their record company, Columbia, who have just heard the songs the band have been working on over the last couple of months for the crucial new album. It's a tense situation. Both the record company and the band are well aware that this record could make or break Judas Priest in the US. British Still had peaked at 34 on US Billboard, exhibiting a massive surge in popularity for a band who had never made it out of the hundreds with a studio album. They were on the cusp. It was time to take the next step. A record company guy stands up, clears his throat, I refuse to do an American accent, and addresses the band, and might have said, with the success of British Still, you are poised to break in the US. We're looking primarily at the North American market. The awareness and expectation is there. The band may well have looked at each other with excited faces. One member of the band may well have piped up and said, yes, we've been out in Ibiza, we've been working on new material, we're really pleased with what we've done. The record company guy clears his throat, may have even looked slightly awkward. Yes, we've heard those, and yes, I do have something to say about that material. But to break America, you need to break AOR radio. You need a hit single. You do understand that, right? Another member of the band may have piped up and said, well, yeah, we've already had a couple of hit singles from British Still. Yes, American guy cuts in, bit aggravated that he keeps getting interrupted, I think. Yes, in the UK you certainly did, but they did fuck all in the States. Seeing certain band members becoming visibly upset at this, record company guy goes on, but Living When You're Uptight did quite well on some US radio stations, that's true. Got a bit of coverage and garnered some awareness, and that awareness is what we have to exploit. Ruthlessly. That's very important. No one in the band can bring themselves to correct him on the title actually being Living After Midnight, because they sense there's a problem. Record company guy. But I'm afraid, gentlemen, that we need a slightly different sort of song to break American radio. It has to be slightly more commercial, more appealing than those previous singles. Blank faces from the band. One member might eventually have stated, but those songs are commercial and appealing. That's as commercial and appealing as we get. The rest of the band may even have given a general murmur of agreement. Record company guy looks at another record company guy, sorry, I should have said, there's two of them, and says, "Excuse us a moment," and the two of them walk outside where they have this conversation in private. Second record company guy, they're not going to go for it. They don't have the faintest idea what it takes to get a hit. They'll never go for the tape. First guy, yes they will. These guys will do anything, I mean anything, to break the US. It is their be-all and end-all. Second guy, I'm not sure. I don't need these guys kicking off. A couple of them look like they can handle themselves. First guy, listen, I will tell you a story, all right? A few years ago, we were still hammering away at them for a hit single. One guy, forget who he was, before my time, decided that they, Judas Priest, an English progressive heavy rock / metal band, to get a hit, should cover a folk song by a female American political activist. Second guy laughs. First guy, and fuck me if they didn't go along with it. This was, of course, Diamonds and Rust by Joan Baez off Sin After Sin, a track that stood out like the sort of sore thumb you would not want to suck. First guy, so listen, we go ahead with the tape. So to cut a long and overly dramatised story short, the band eventually agreed to listen to a loop tape featuring recent singles by Journey, Boston and Foreigner. I believe they drew the line at Cheap Trick. For 5 hours. Solid. When the tape ended, the first record company guy said with a big smile, "That's what we want, boys." Anything like that. 5 dazed and beaten faces may have looked up at him. One member of Priest might have said hesitantly, "But what if we don't get it right first time?" Another member might have even added, "Or second time." The record guy holds up his hand placatingly. "Guys, what? You're going to have at least 10 tracks on this new record, right?" The band nod. "Well, that gives you 10 goes at it, doesn't it?" One member may then have said, "What shall we do with the stuff we've already written?" Record company guy. Bin it. With that, the meeting is over and the band gets slowly to their feet. As they do, 5 distinct wet slaps are heard from under the table as 5 pairs of testicles hit the floor. Having rid themselves of their balls and musical integrity, soulless eunuchs Judas Priest are now ready to write points of entry. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but that's the way I feel. This makes me angry. Not so much with what they did, but with why they did it. The self-serving, unethical falsity of it. The only saving grace is that it failed. No hit singles in the States, and a significant drop in album sales. They'd fucked up. and it was all their own fault. They'd pandered to their worst tendencies, and it served them right. And what did they have to say for themselves when the shit eventually hit the fan? How did they excuse this away? First bassist Ian Hill. We always had artistic license or artistic rights where if we didn't want to do something, we didn't have to. But these people do know their business, i.e. Columbia Records. If they come to us and say, listen, I don't think there's anything on here that's going to get you onto rock radio, how about trying this? We'll obviously listen and pay attention to that. Right. In other words, bin all the material you've been working on in Ibiza and start again. Here's the ever diplomatic Tom Allen's take. Quotes, if I cast my mind back, CBS Records probably said, now in Tom Allen language, probably means absolutely, definitely, we do need some more commercial stuff. And Point of Entry was the only album that I was involved with where they consciously tried to write singles. As a result of which, they didn't write any. End quote. Even the unduly protective and almost xenophobic KK Downing tried a bit of desperate distancing when it all turned to shit. Quote, I'd be lying if I said that I loved every track on Point of Entry. As was often the case, I'd sometimes walk into the studio to find Glenn and Rob jamming out an idea and getting off on it. All I could do was just go with it, even if I didn't particularly like the track. End quote. Rob Halford, to his credit, was a bit more blunt. Quote, Point of Entry came out to the reviews it deserved. Too many songs fell short. There was a big drop in terms of quality. I think we half knew it at the time. But we all kept quiet and went along with it. End quote. That could be Priest's mantra, couldn't it? Keep quiet and go along with it. And though Priest characteristically played it down, I believe that with the failure of Point of Entry, they must have been absolutely seething that on the verge of breaking America, they had allowed themselves to be pimped, no other word, by the record company and possibly by US management. They'd lost a year's progress. This was a wake-up call to Priest. They had to stop bending over and taking it. They had to write for themselves, for their fans. And to give them credit, that's exactly what they did on this. They went back to Ibiza to record, and although it seems they partied just as hard then as now, they were armed with a new attitude, a new determination, this time to follow their instincts. Priest and producer Tom Allen knew they had to get it right. The US was still waiting. It hadn't been lost, just postponed. Halford for that album, quote, Tom cracked the whip and we focused as hard on the writing and the music as we had on British Steel. Our record label had been emphasising to us that we were on the cusp of getting very big in the US. Now, to an extent, after the debacle of Point of Entry, Columbia pretty much left Priest alone to get on with the screaming for vengeance, except when it came to the first all-important single. Priest had had 10 stabs at it on Point of Entry, and from that Columbia knew that Judas Priest wouldn't know a hit single if it teabagged 3 of them in Times Square. So they told the group that they were bringing in Bob Halligan Jr., the go-to guy at that time, to write them their hit single. And how does it go, that mantra? Yes, Judas Priest kept quiet and went along with it. Apart from that, the writing in Ibiza went well, despite, as I said, the obligatory partying. Downing states that, quote, we were on an absolute roll from a songwriting perspective, end quote. And he also claimed that quote, America was finally ready for the complete Judas Priest package, end quote. They'd been ready 2 years ago, mate, but there you go. And then something really strange happened that no one seems to really want to talk about. Something that Priest themselves must have instigated, halted the album's progress for months. Now, I know that they'd already overrun their recording slot in Ibiza. I know that most of the tracks were already in the can waiting to be mixed. But then and there, Judas Priest split with their UK management, Anna Carter, mispronounced, a dual team of Jim Dawson and Mike Dolan, choosing to go with Dolan alone. Presumably, everything suddenly got very complicated, so everything stalled, and they literally left Ibiza with no idea when they were going to finish the most important album of their career. Tom Allen, with typical understatement, quote, "That was a tricky album for them to make. We went back to Ibiza and we did a few songs, about 5 or 6, and then the album was stalled by an internal dispute with their management. Their management split into 2, and they went with one half, and we didn't actually resume that album until April or thereabouts." Well, that's months locked into a self-imposed hiatus. Priest must have been desperate to ditch Mr. Dawson, who many years later, one of the band insinuated had had significant drug problems. After a little digging, it appears that this split had been a long time coming, and I'm guessing in part inflamed by the failure of Point of Entry, Priest were frustrated with UK management over financial arrangements and control of their future career. The band wanted greater autonomy over finances, touring and recording, and this move allowed them to negotiate a more favourable contract, asserting creative control over music and live performances. So on the face of it, this was a very astute business move, as this newfound autonomy allowed them to fully reap the benefits of Screaming for Vengeance, which would obviously become their biggest selling album ever. So the band eventually reconvened in Florida to mainly mix the album at BJ Studios and Bayshore. And it seems they needed one more track, and that track was the song that gave Judas Priest their American breakthrough, You've Got Another Thing Coming. And typically for Priest, it was an afterthought. And typically for Priest, they didn't even rate the song that would transform their fortunes. They just saw it as filling a gap. As KK Downing said, quote, "We decided later on that we could add one more song. It almost didn't make it onto the album," end quote. Basically, the impression I get is that Priest had bits and pieces of the song lying around which they slapped together in the studio. But credit where credit's due. When Columbia heard it, they knew what they had, the longed-for single. The record company pushed for it, and Priest, as we know, always did what the record company said. Even if Downing, quote, "We thought they were mad. We didn't think it was strong enough," end quote. Christ, you couldn't make it up. Though, have to say as an aside, this does remind me of another band from Birmingham a decade earlier, writing a last-minute song in the studio to fill out an album and it turning into their biggest ever single. So Screaming for Vengeance was released, and You've Got Another Thing Coming was released, and that was it for once. Having spent their early career being in the wrong place at the wrong time, see my previous video on British Steel, Judas Priest were in the right place at the right time. Why? Because of MTV. MTV had been going for about a year and already dictated what people listened to and what they bought. MTV sold You've Got Another Thing Coming single-handedly to America. The video was directed by Julian Temple. It was a classic. It was singular, impactful, delightfully ham-fisted, and very, very British. And it blew away American teenagers who had never seen metal presented this way before. And consequently, Priest thereby took metal into places it had never been before. You could hear this single everywhere, in the mall, in the car, in the suburbs. It's no exaggeration that Priest's videos and tour footage dominated MTV from mid-82 to 83. Okay, let's talk about the album. First off, unlike the indecipherable cover to Point of Entry, Screaming for Vengeance has a fantastically evocative cover. a facsimile of an American bald eagle created by Doug Johnson, who also did the next two covers. This easily the best of those, and second only, I feel, to British Steel. It's iconic. Halford claims the idea for the cover was his, pertinent to their throbbing passion for all things America. It seems, I quote, "I was thinking about America. I was thinking about their national bird, the bald eagle," end quote. Christ, that must have been a slow day, Rob. They call this bird the Hellion, and there is some clever blurb in the liner notes telling you all about it. Absolute rubbish, of course, but then I guess not too many teenagers are going to check on the real meaning of the word Hellion, which unbelievably doesn't mean an armour-plated eagle, but perhaps even more unbelievably, actually is an old-fashioned word to describe a mischievous vagabond, though I guess putting a tramp on the cover armed with a cheeky grin wouldn't have had the same effect. Okay, onto the album. Well, it starts with the grandiose intro, Hellion, which flows into Electric Eye, which immediately shows us that this is not going to be point of entry Mark II. It's heavier than anything they've done before, and it sets the tone for most of the album. The riffs are always heavy, locked, loaded. The drums are continuous rotating jackhammers. The songs raise the ground around them, time after time. I mean, it's not all killer. For me, Take These Chains, the Halligan single, is where the album falters. It's lightweight and so obviously by the numbers. And Fever, I feel, is a drop in quality. They try and hang the song on a melodic hook. It's simply not strong enough. But for the rest, it's all killer, with Screaming for Vengeance, the title track, standing head and shoulders above the rest. Bassist Ian Hill said it was the key track on the album, and he's right. It's the heaviest and fastest thing Priest had ever done, and is also that rarest of all songs. It's prophetic. Okay, have to give a nod to Tom Allen, because this is the best produced Judas Priest album ever, especially with the vocals. In the mix, Allen waxed them up front and centre, and consequently Halford has never sounded better. Halford's work on this album is absolutely sterling. Judas Priest defined heavy metal with British Steel, and they broke it wide open in the States with this. The influence and effect of this album is colossal and cannot be overstated. And it was immediate. Maiden, Leopard, Quiet Riot all rode in on Priest's coattails with massive sales in the US. And even more impressively, I believe, this album, and in particular the title track, which was one of the earliest versions of speed metal, if not the earliest version, the only negative being it probably gave us Halloween, inspired young up-and-coming thrash bands who would, in the case of Slayer and Metallica, roll out their debuts the following year. And Priest simply do not get the credit for their influence in this sphere. And that's not helped by misleading quotes from people like Lars Ulrich, pompous arse and average musician, my opinion, who would pontificate that it was Motorhead and Venom who inspired him. But that was just Lars trying to be eclectic and well-versed, because if you think about it, logically, Motorhead and Venom sold absolutely nothing in the States. They weren't on MTV, they weren't on the radio, and with titles like 1000 Days in Sodom and Sex and Outrage, it was unlikely they'd ever get much coverage, even if they wrote a classic. No, it was Judas Priest with Screaming for Vengeance, an album that sold millions and went double platinum, that inspired these guys, that they heard every day, everywhere. And we have the quotes to back it. Anthrax's Scott Ian, quote, "The guys in Judas Priest are heroes, they're mentors," end quote. Anthrax even recorded a song entitled Judas Priest as a tribute. Dave Ellefson of Megadeth stated that Megadeth and Judas Priest are very similar musically. Dave Mustaine even said that his rock god was Glenn Tipton. Quote, "I had no idea how much Glenn Tipton and Judas Priest had influenced my guitar playing until I recently covered Delivering the Goods," end quote. Slayer guitarist Kerry King famously stated, quote, "There would be no Slayer without Priest." James Hetfield, quote, Judas Priest is everything we wanted to be as a band starting out. End quote. Okay, where would I place Screaming for Vengeance in Priest's 19-album career? Probably second. I feel there are a couple of weaker tracks. So do you agree that Point of Entry is so bad? If not, convince me. And is Screaming for Vengeance as good and influential as I feel it to be? And are Halloween totally shit? No, forget that, because they are. Let me know your comments, and please smash a like and subscribe, because it all helps with my enlarged prostate.